Welcome back. Today I have another book review. Today this book that I'm looking at is called The Grandmaster, Magnus Carlsen and the Match That Made Chess Great Again by Brin-Jonathan Butler, an author I had not heard of, but I saw this colorful cover at a bookstore on a recent trip, decided to pick it up. It purports to be about the 2016 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and the Russian guy, Karjakin. I don't know if that's how you say his name. But if I had to rate this on a 5-star scale, I would probably give it a 2.5 or 3 stars if I was being generous. And hopefully a few things that I mentioned in this review will explain why the rating is so low. First, just the title of the book, The Match That Made Chess Great Again. This is obviously a reference to the former president's campaign speech, Make America Great Again. But just as with America, chess was not ungreat at the time and didn't become greater upon this event. Did it make chess more popular? I don't think so. I don't remember that happening. I don't know if there's any stats to show that. I do know, and I have seen stats to show, that chess became a lot more popular after the Queen's Gambit was released in, what was it, 2020, 2021? But if not talking about popular, what are we talking about when we say chess was great again? I don't know. I don't think chess changed in any substantive or fundamental way upon this match's conclusion or opening. So the title right off the bat is meaningless. It's a pointless reference to a political campaign speech or slogan. Second, the book starts off not in 2016 when this championship match was held. It also doesn't start off in 1990, which is when the two players were born. You might expect that there would be some background information on the two players. Both of them were born in 1990, which sadly was the year I graduated from high school. So, but it starts off in AD 813. Yeah, 1200 years ago, about some battle in Baghdad where one of the rulers was playing chess while his palace was being stormed. And without much transition, it just skips forward 8 centuries from one paragraph to the next and starts talking about King Charles in England in the 1600s. And then it just skips forward again, like 400 more years to 2016. And we're talking about the Plaza Hotel in New York City, which is apparently where the opening gala was held for this tournament. And the author just starts name-dropping some of the famous people who are going to be at this tournament, including mentioning that Donald Trump had once owned this hotel. Didn't own it at the time of the tournament, but because of he's already mentioned or made reference to Trump in the title of the book, so he has to mention him again. And then the Plaza Hotel does have a history with chess, so he delves into that a little bit. Garry Kasparov was there back in the 90s one time or twice. But anyway, then on page 6, just as people start showing up to this match, and we've mentioned who the MC is, and that Woody Harrelson is going to make the ceremonial opening move, the author just breaks off from there and says, "But what about me? There was a reasonable question to address before long. What the hell was I doing there?" What does that matter? Sorry, I've read a lot of nonfiction books, biography, historical, event-based, and the author, if it's a good nonfiction book, the author doesn't just break in and start telling his own story. But this one does. And so he tells briefly how he got the job through a Twitter direct message, apparently. And because of his unique perspective of having covered boxing in Cuba and bullfighting in Spain, the publisher thought, well, this might be a great guy to cover this World Chess Championship. And then because he thinks, oh, maybe the readers won't think I know a lot about chess, so he then goes into some of his own backstory about how he learned how to play chess, and he visited his estranged uncle in Hungary back in the 90s. Now, this is the author, not Magnus Carlsen, not Karjakin or Donald Trump, but the author went to Hungary in the 1990s and talks about how his uncle was drunk all the time, and I'm flipping pages, just going through this story, naming people that are never going to show up in this book again, and then how his uncle later mailed him a chess set when he died. The uncle died, not the author. The author was still alive when he wrote this book. That was a joke. But anyway, so we're at, I don't know, what, page 20 before the opening gala is mentioned again. And then the book kind of does that throughout the rest of the book. He comes back to New York City to mention the World Chess Championship match. Talks about some of the people he met there in the lobby and how much the entry fees were. And then when he finally starts talking about the chess games, I think he does a pretty good job, and this is where at least 2 stars come from. He does a pretty good job of describing the players' emotions and their facial expressions, their body language, whether, they're sitting back relaxed or, head buried in their hands, tense, worried, confident. He does pretty well with that, perhaps because of his previous experience in covering various sporting events. But when it comes to the game on the board, despite all this background story he's given us on how well he knows chess, he doesn't describe the games very well, in my opinion. I don't know if you've ever read sports books, whether fictional or non-fictional, and if the author is making it clear they don't know much about that sport, I don't know. Johnny Unitas threw a pass, and that was what won the game. And okay, you got to give me more information than that. Well, was it 4th and 10 with 10 seconds on the clock, or what? Who caught the pass? Was the coverage broken? But it was kind of like that. Carlsen advances a bishop hesitantly. Karjakin worries about this and then makes the wrong pawn move. And okay, but you don't tell me where those pieces are on the board. I can't picture what's happening. And your average reader who doesn't know about chess certainly isn't going to be helped by that. But then, after describing the outcome of the first game, which, if you remember this match, was the first 7 games were draws. After the first game, then he just goes back into some other story. And at one point he goes back and tells the story of Magnus Carlsen's childhood. Another point he goes back and tells a story of Karjakin's childhood, youth, which those 2 are relevant. But then in other places he goes back and spends an entire chapter on this guy he met at this championship, describing his experience with Bobby Fischer in the 50s and 60s. Then he brings up another chess player I've never heard of, Pete Winston, I think that was his name, and how he mysteriously disappeared. Well, that's not relevant to this at all, except he lived in New York City at one point in the 70s. And then another chapter, he gives a history of Judith Polgar. That's only slightly relevant because Judith Polgar was one of, I think, the commentators at this match in 2016. But the whole chapter is just her history, how she grew up playing chess with her sisters, trained by her father. And then we come back for the next game. Each one of those little stories takes up almost a whole chapter. Then we come back for the next game, and what some of the commentators said and how the crowd reacted, and then it was another draw. And he describes the weather outside, which, okay, that's more relevant in an actual sporting event that's outside. But I guess if you're waiting in line for this, it matters if it was raining or cold. But anyway, I felt like a lot of this stuff was thrown in to pad it. It probably could have been a long-form magazine article, maybe in Esquire, Vanity Fair, something like that, which they do have some good articles. Check them out. But it felt like in order to make it a book, he just had to keep adding these stories in. He adds in another story about when he stayed in Cuba for a while, and I think that's when he wrote his previous book about Cuban boxers. But so he has a whole chapter about when he stayed in Cuba and played chess with this guy up on the roof day after day, the guy who lived in his building, I think. And then we come back to this chess match. And if you don't remember, I think Karjakin won game 8, then they drew again, and then Magnus Carlsen won game 10, and then they drew till the end of the thing, and so it was 1-1. And as far as wins go, and all the rest were draws, so they had to go into the rapid tie breaks, and Carlsen won those. But anyway, so that turned out to not be you know, a little bit underwhelming, despite him building up Karjakin as a possible contender. Then he has a whole chapter about finding Josh Waitzkin. If you'll remember, in the 1990s, Josh Waitzkin was the subject of a nonfiction book and movie called Searching for Bobby Fischer. So finding Josh Waitzkin was kind of a, I guess, a nod to that. So he has a whole chapter about how Josh Waitzkin doesn't play chess anymore. And, you know, he went on to become a martial artist. I think he just got tired of chess, especially after the movie came out. But anyway, then we get to the end, and Magnus Carlsen wins with the brilliant move, which is the name of the chapter, Queen to H6 check, double exclamation point. Brilliant move. But he, again, does not describe the rest of the situation on the board, so the reader has no idea why that's such a brilliant move, other than everyone around reacted that it was. So he gets to the end and tries to make some ties with Bobby Fischer. Page 208 tries to tie it in with 9/11 somehow. Okay, 9/11 happened in New York, as you remember, and Bobby Fischer, who played chess, mentioned 9/11 and seemed happy about it. Also, Donald Trump had some things to say about 9/11, so all those have to be mentioned here in order to make this book longer, even though they have nothing to do with the 2016 World Chess Championship. And then at the end, he has a couple of pages where he tries to conclude, try to wrap this up somehow, and he gets a little philosophical, but I think maybe he didn't have the same philosophy class as I did, because he said, you know, in the end, all these quests to be the best at one sport or another are the issues of children. Underneath springs an innocent yet awesome desire to conquer all, an unchecked power. Only a child would dream of becoming world heavyweight champion, of becoming president, ruling the world, or the world in miniature, conquering a chessboard, devoting a life to a game that so few truly understand. And basically goes on to say that a well-balanced adult would never attempt these things. So but then he praises them in the last sentence, that the people who do attempt those things are doing it in our stead, because we're so well-balanced that we wouldn't even try it. But so none of the people trying to be Super Bowl champion or world heavyweight boxing champion, I don't know, Stanley Cup winners, Indy 500, NASCAR, all these other things that people compete at and try to be the best at. He says that's because they're children, I guess mentally, and that we who sit back and watch it and critique it are the well-balanced adults. Anyway, I was pretty disappointed in the ending. But again, the reason that I'm giving it at least 2 stars, possibly 3, he did a good job describing the moments in the championship with the players facing off, and he described the scene really well around him, in between all his distracting tangents that he went off on. And one other thing is, like with any nonfiction book, I always give it a point if I learned something from it. And I felt like I did learn some things from this book. I did learn a little bit more about Magnus Carlsen's background, about Karjakin's background. And I think I learned a few other anecdotes about the history of chess that I may not have known before. But again, due to the lack of citations, I don't know how many of those anecdotes are just stories that people told, or because sometimes he doesn't attribute them to anybody. Not, you know, this person told me this, but just this is what happened. In those cases, if there's no citation, then he's just telling me a tale. But I did learn something, and I enjoyed it most of the way through. I just kept getting distracted by all the tangents that were going nowhere. And I think the book could have been, like I said, either just a long article in a magazine, or there would have had to have been other championships mentioned in this book, or something that was more relevant to the story to pad it out to book length. But anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.